Hey, Awesomes, how's it going? I thought I'd start a video here to talk about Project 2B, which is the user test memo, which I alluded to, spoke a little bit about what the readings are what the readings are kind of talking about this week, and talking about in the overview video that I'm sure you probably already watched. So I thought I'd give some more ideas about that, because usability.gov, as I mentioned, the reporting, the usability test section that I wanted you to read, and then also wanted to make some notes too as far as writing memos in general with Markel's text, and kind of give you some key pages for that, and then kind of overall how to put this thing together. So first off, in the usability.gov that you're reading this week, I had said to watch the planning user test, and so for a lot of you, I know that this particular semester there are a lot of recipes being done, and then a lot of other either equations to solve and things of that nature. So I'm going to kind of speak generally about every single one of those, really. So in a usability test, the thing in the planning is what are we testing for? What is the thing that we're trying to make sure when we have someone test our set of instructions, what it is we want to know? What are we trying to find out when we do that? Well, in this particular case, we want to make sure, A, that they can get through, that the steps are clear, right? They're concise. You might review the rubric, which is at the bottom of the Project 2B page on our website. Talks about how, well, obviously there's a list of how everything's being graded, and a lot of it speaks to we use the formatting correctly, things like that we can figure out. The thing that we're trying to figure out is whether or not the instructions are still effective. And a lot of that has to do with either clarity, concise, did we forget a step, are the steps laid out in the proper order? When it comes to recipes, did we specify the right amounts? Did we exactly explain how to do everything? So when someone sits down and is looking at our WikiHow page, all right, which is what you want to do for this. So you're going to want to have your WikiHow page done, have your photos on there. You're going to pull that up on your computer, and let's say that you're asking someone to make whatever, nachos, we'll say. And they were going to take the ingredients, they're going to sit and they're going to actually go through the process and do it. All right, so when that is done, you need an instrument of some kind, some way that you're gauging that, right? Whether it's a follow-up interview or whether you're going to ask them to talk aloud. You'll read about talk aloud protocols on the usability.gov site, talking about user testability, or usability testing, excuse me. And so you're going to want to sit down and write some sort of an instrument, right, where you're going to have at least maybe 1, 2, or 3 people get a chance to test your instructions. And so you're either going to want to get some feedback from them, or maybe have a list of questions. I would say no more than, you don't want anything longer than a page document, where you might get 5 to 10 types of either questions and answers that you can then ascertain and be able to make some sort of, arrive at some sort of conclusion as to what you need to do to revise these set of instructions, so that the next person, let's say that you have somebody test it, a couple people test it, they give you some feedback, and then you were to go back and revise those instructions. Either you need to add a bullet point, you need to reword something, you need to add measurements, you need to add quantities, you need to add amounts, you need to add some stuff. That is what you're going to do to revise, right? So the purpose of user test memo is to tell me the following. Number one, what your usability test was. Who took your user test, in a way, right? Who were the 2 or 3 people, right? So that you can make some sort of informed decision of how you're going to arrive at your conclusions. And your conclusion is, here's what I'm going to do to revise, right? And your revision conclusions, etc., need to be more specific than I'm going to make it more clear, right? It needs to be something like, in step 10, I did not have, it was unclear to the user that blah, blah, blah. So to make that more, to alleviate the concern there, to alleviate the ambiguity, in that particular step, I'm going to add the following, right? Very specific what you're going to do. The picture did not truly represent and confused my users. So I'm going to make sure that that picture is now going to reflect what is taking place in that step. All right, does that make sense? So, all right, so let's look at the, let me minimize myself down here. All right, so here's the user test memo. So to start off with the user test memo, okay, let me go back up here real quick. All right, so user test memo. It's a memo. All right, so if you want a page reference in Markel, that would be page 253 and 254. The example on 254 is written on letterhead. All right, the example, don't worry about letterhead, okay? The main thing I'm concerned about is that your memo, if you look at the one on 253, the very first example, I just want to say memo at the top of the page in all caps. And then I prefer the formatting that has the to line, from line, a subject line, and a date. Okay? And you'll notice in the example also on page 254 that it's very, very precise, right? It says interoffice communication, I prefer memo, and then to, from, subject, date. Then there's a space, then you have somewhat like an introduction, okay, and then you have sections, okay? So let's talk about those sections real quick. All right, so here we go. Conduct a test for this, conduct a test 2 to 3 users. Of course, you can ideally do it at a novice, intermediate, or an expert level. And then design a method by which users will execute your instructions in an observable environment. Compose an empirical report including the following sections. All right, you have your introduction. You'll have your objectives. What are you trying to identify, right? Which we've kind of discussed already, right? Your method. How did you do it? Your results and discussion. And here, specifically and in great detail, report test results include descriptions of user test difficulties and questions. Describe the user test and their consequences, and also in this results and discussion here, what are you going to do to revise? And then you want to include your raw test data. And this one I said earlier, you need some sort of an instrument, data collection instruments from user tests. So if you're going to have someone do this test, you're either taking notes, right? You're going to ask them some questions afterwards, right? So you're going to have the question, and then what did that user specifically say, and then you're going to type out those answers and include those with your usability test. Okay. All right. So it's pretty straightforward. You do the test, etc., etc. But let's go over back to reporting usability testing. And I'd said writing the usability test report in my earlier video that these are the kind of the sections here that you want to do, and they're fairly close to what's taking place here, right? So in this one here it says introduction and objectives. This one here says like a background summary, right? And then you might consider that this is like your introduction, and then this might be also where you would also include your objectives, right? As far as the background, what's the purpose of this usability test? Because you're sending it out in this memo format. So we're kind of reporting a usability test through the use of a memo, right? So this is kind of very memo style-ish right there. Then you have your method, right? You got your methods, methodology. You've got your test results, right? Results discussion here, right? And then finally, this here says finding and recommendations. Ours is kind of a conclusion, right? We're going to describe what's taking place. All right. So they use a little bit of different wordings and verbiage, but I would prefer, if you would, for the purpose of this, use these. Introduction, objectives, method, results, discussion, and conclusion. And then you can use this one here to kind of like give you a little bit more details as far as what kind of things to add into those sections, if that makes sense. Okay? All right. So that's kind of a brief, well, it's not brief. I guess we're over 8 minutes already, so I apologize for that. But I wanted to give you a little bit more details on this. Look at the sample on page 254, right? Notice the hierarchy. Notice the level next, the headings, right? And recall our hierarchy. Recall all the things that we have learned this semester when it comes to technical communications, especially when it comes to writing a memo, right? We're going to follow this kind of format. We're going to participate in the genre of the memo, and we're going to make sure that we use our headings, right? We're going to use hierarchy. So that means we want to think about serif and sans serif fonts and following and participating in that genre. All right, guys. All right, so we're coming up a little over 9 minutes. I'm going to end this now. If you have any more questions or if there's anything more that I can do for you, you just please let me know. Have fun. Usability testing can be a lot of fun, so do enjoy it, and you will learn a lot from it. And just include that with your testing, with your test results, and what you're going to do to revise. Okay? All right, I'll be back to you guys. See you guys soon. Have a great week. Thanks for watching. Bye.